Welcome to the Preservation Society of Asheville and Buncombe County's experimental online educational series. We're doing this because currently all of our education programming is shut down because of the 2020 coronavirus pandemic. Now, there'll be nothing fancy about this video. It'll be like the PowerPoint presentation you would see if you attended in person, except the audio is pre-recorded. We're hoping that my personality and information will make up for the lack of seeing me in person. Please note there's a pause at the beginning and end of each slide to allow the PowerPoint audio to transition without hiccups. We're grateful to all our sponsors, but this week we're especially grateful to Brunk Auctions, world-class consignments and exceptional results. But I'm being rude. Who am I? I'm James Vaughn. I'm a member of the Preservation Society and one of the owners of Chiles House. We're the guys who got the house on the National Register of Historic Places. I'm a history buff, and I also tend to talk fast. But the nice thing about video is you can always pause and go back, or get more information about Chiles Avenue and the history of Kenilworth at our website, chiles-house.com. If you saw our previous video, Crime and Punishment on Chiles Avenue, you can skip ahead a few slides. For those of you who are new, a bit of background on Jake and Leah Chiles, Chiles Avenue, and the town of Kenilworth. James Madison Chiles, or Jake as he was known, was the start of it all. He first came to Asheville in 1908 and fell in love with the town and Kenilworth Inn, and he became the first mayor of the town of Kenilworth in 1915. Born in South Carolina, he was involved in the furniture business, which he sold when he moved here. That's where he met and married Leah Arquette Chiles. Leah was the daughter of Casimir Arquette, a sculptor who worked on the hands of the Statue of Liberty. She was a true partner in the business, co-owning many of the properties they developed and sold together. She was also the first woman elected mayor of a town in western North Carolina in 1928, and she would serve as its last mayor as well when the town of Kenilworth was annexed by Asheville in 1929. Now what about that Kenilworth Inn? Well, it was a grand luxury inn that burned down in 1909. It didn't have enough insurance, so most believed it would never be rebuilt. But Jake rescued it and brought it back like a phoenix from the ashes, unfortunately just in time for the military to take it as a military hospital. Jake reacquired the inn and made a success of it. Jake wanted a development like that around the Grove Park Inn, but more affordable, and it was said that Jake and Leah helped to finance some of the homes, which caused problems, of course, when the first wave of the Depression hit Asheville in 1927. Pictured here is the town hall, with Leah Chiles and the town clerk, Ada Ward. The town hall, set up in a home, is now a private residence again today. The title of our series is It Happened on Chiles Avenue. Why Chiles Avenue? Well, because it's a microcosm of what was happening through the 20th century and into modern day, not just in the town of Kenilworth, but in broader terms what was happening in Asheville as well. Pictured here is an aerial view of Chiles Avenue from the 1920s. The arrow shows you Chiles House, and the green area just above it is the park renamed in Leah Chiles' honor in 2018. Chiles Avenue was a who's who of society and politics in the 1920s, and this video series tells the stories of the homes as well as their owners. Jake's vision of Chiles Avenue is demonstrated by this ad, which notes that it was most suitable for the most pretentious homes. Apparently pretentious had a different connotation back then. The Town Council of Kenilworth designated Chiles Avenue as a major thoroughfare. But if you've ever driven down it today, there's barely enough room for one car when people park on the street. A big reason we're able to know so much about Chiles Avenue is because of the social media of the era. That is, before there was Facebook, there was the local newspaper. It acted in much the same way. A place for humble brags over achievements, travel, or visiting friends. A place to share illness or the bad news in our lives. It was a way to share photos and generally let our friends and the rest of society keep up with what was going on in our lives. In our case, it helps to show what was happening on Chiles Avenue and how it reflected what was happening in Asheville and the world beyond it. It's time we start to wrap this up. We conclude with a two-part episode that will be more like the originally intended presentation. I'm going to virtually walk us down Chiles Avenue twice. The first time will be to look at Chiles Avenue through the lens of progress from the town's founding up to the outbreak of World War II. We will look at the homes that were built during that time period and call out important people and events that haven't been covered in the other episodes. In part 2, we will walk down Chiles again, looking at the progress from 1940 to the current day and what lies ahead. Again, we will use the residents of Chiles Avenue and how they played a role in or represented what was happening in the broader community and world around them, including the role of residents of Chiles and Kenilworth in the integration of schools and the downtown business community. How did the smallest town in the South come to be? In 1889, former Pennsylvania state senator, and I hope I pronounced this name correctly, Joseph M. Gazem moved to the Asheville area and with backing from George Vanderbilt of Biltmore fame, built the Kenilworth Inn in 1890. Gazem managed to convince the North Carolina state legislature to incorporate the area around the inn as the town of Kenilworth, but never formally organized it with a government. In 1909, as we know, the inn burned down. Gazem was seriously injured in the fire because he refused to leave his room when the fire broke out, despite several warnings and attempts to reach him through his locked door. He eventually recognized the danger, and the 65-year-old jumped from his third-floor room onto the roof of the portico of the main entrance. He bounced from that and landed on the ground on his back. He eventually recovered, and fortunately no lives were lost in the fire. But the inn was grossly underinsured, and it seemed the end for the inn. Jake Chiles, whom we met a moment ago, partnered with E.G. Hester and Roland Wilson to found the Kenilworth Development Company. They rebuilt the inn and developed the town of Kenilworth. They created a town commissioner form of government and in 1915 held its first election. 6 of the 7 eligible town voters, who according to news reports, possibly stated tongue-in-cheek, had all been living together in the same house a few years prior. They unanimously elected Chiles mayor. The 7th missing voter was variously reported as being sick, at lunch, or out of town. Morris Myers joined Hester and Wilson as the first town commissioners. The election cost them 35 cents. It made regional news because of how few voters there were. This article noted that Kenilworth was, by numbers, the smallest town in North Carolina and possibly the entire South. But the town quickly grew by development and by annexing nearby areas, including Fontainebleau, the area around Normandy off Kenilworth Road, in 1927, and the black community referred by an Asheville Citizen article as Bracketville in 1928. We can follow the path of development by walking down Chiles Avenue, beginning at 87 Kenilworth Road, the Richard Sharp Smith arts and crafts inspired bungalow that was built by Chiles in 1914, and later expanded when he married Leah. Colonel Hester, as he was called for some reason, was noted as a pioneer tobacconist in his obituary due to his work for R.J. Reynolds. He built a 5-bungalow complex of log cabin revival-style homes, which did not please Chiles, who had a distinctly different vision for the town. The bungalows, completed in 1917, were said to be California-inspired and described as having double fronts, with the rear entrance being as attractive as the front entrance. We saw the first, number 1.5, in our first segment on crime and punishment on Chiles Avenue. Number 2 and 3 and 3 and the third are listed here by their mailboxes. It is not known if the fifth still exists or was incorporated into one of the others. They provide the perfect introduction to the architectural history of Chiles Avenue. Jake was no doubt pleased by this 1923 home one source calls the LightMcClintock home. Its most prominent resident was Reverend Paul Gresham, who was the pastor of the Kenilworth Presbyterian Church across the street, before moving into 139 Kenilworth, which was the housing for church pastors for decades. This home almost got a mention in the crime and punishment video, as an occupant after the Reverend was arrested for illegal liquor sales at the Montfort Cafe. We met this home in the 2-part segment on the Jewish history of Chiles Avenue, another home that would have pleased Jake Chiles. Number 11 Chiles was built on a property of multiple lots and was said to have had a tennis court to the left and a series of tiered gardens to the right, which were replaced later by homes. M.K. Zindel was the owner and presumed builder of this 1918 home. Zindel had a number of businesses in town, especially bakeries and ice cream cone manufacturing. He served as a town commissioner and was appointed mayor of Kenilworth in 1923 when Jake stepped down as mayor, we think for health reasons. We'll hear more about him later. In the 1940s, it was the home of Mr. and Mrs. William Campbell. After Mr. Campbell died in 1942, Grace Campbell, his widow, began running these discreet ads for caring for young children and babies in her home. But what she was really doing, according to the current residents, was running a home for unwed mothers. Her progressive views were at odds with the views many took of unwed mothers at the time. The current owners tell me that they've had the grown children of these women show up and ask if they can see the room where their mother lived. Next door at number 15, where the tennis courts once stood, is this home built in approximately 1939, based on the report of the sale of the land by Zindel in 1938. It was the home of Mr. and Mrs. Granville Masters. We see many examples of these colonial-style homes with stone facing or stone entryways throughout Kenilworth. Another home on the opposite side of the street is this 1923 simplistic colonial revival at 16 Chiles. I want to take a moment to genuinely thank Dale Slusser, PSABC's architectural history guru, who patiently identified all of the homes on Chiles for me and answered my many follow-up questions. We're very lucky to have him. In 1928, the owners began running ads promoting Kingledores as a way for visiting tourists to have an affordable alternative to the expensive downtown hotels. You might think of this as the Airbnb of its day. The Thomas Wolfe Memorial website notes that in 1910, there were 137 boarding houses like Julia Wolfe's and Kingledores. This was driven by the population and tourist boom, as the population of Asheville increased from 28,000 in 1920 to over 50,000 by 1930. Hotel room prices were said to have skyrocketed from $2.50 a night to $10 a night, while boarding houses offered rates of $15 to $25 a week, this according to the book Historic Inns of Asheville. Then, as now, these were opportunities for people, especially women, to be able to leverage their homes to earn money so they could hold on to them, especially during the Depression. Many homes along Chiles Avenue, including Chiles House and the Pollock House, were listed as boarding homes or with rooms to rent, especially during the Depression. No word on whether that caused controversy with neighbors or local governments, but another reminder that everything old is new again. They appear to have been self-policing in that way, and perhaps Kingledores directed anyone with complaints or who refused to pay their bill to use this exit. In 1938, like many others, struggling home-based businesses tried to help make ends meet, like the Lily Rose Candy Kitchen. She may not have been able to do this before the town was annexed in 1929. Kenilworth Town formally banned businesses as well as TB boarding houses within the boundaries of Kenilworth. In 1922, the home I call Newlywed's Nest was built. Not much is known about this home or its early residents, but W.J. Lehmann used this as a summer home. He may have been the brother-in-law to Roland Wilson. His son would gain infamy in Florida after being shot by a woman while attempting to break into her home, demanding to see one of her roommates. What his wife must have thought about that is not known. The woman who shot him was tried for second-degree murder, but acquitted by the jury in 1939. This address pops up in newspaper accounts over the years repeatedly in marriage announcements, noting that the newlyweds would start up residence at 20 Chiles Avenue. It advertised a basement apartment and a cottage out back. The building is still used as a rental today, and the main house has been divided to accommodate more apartments. An example of adaptive reuse, better than tearing down a beautiful old building. Back across the street, the house with an address of 1 Westchester once went by the address of 18 Chiles. Jake and Leah Chiles sold land to Miss Wilhemina Test, and this arts and crafts bungalow was built approximately 1919. City directories noted many people by the name of Test over the 1920s, as she apparently had siblings and relatives living with her. She also appears to have rented rooms based on ads that ran, offering rooms for rent at this address. We'll hear more about her brother, J.W., soon. We've heard about number 17, the Bremen House, from the Jewish History segment, and about 21 Chiles ad nauseum. In between was the Holland House at number 19, named for Edward Holland, a cotton buyer who served as a town commissioner and had unfulfilled ambitions to be elected mayor. According to the current owner, Jake Chiles convinced Holland to buy a home and move here if he built a home like Holland's house in Florida. Maybe as an added inducement, he named the street immediately behind these 3 houses after Holland. What most think is an alley is actually a street called Holland Place. We discovered that one of the first times we plugged an address into our GPS, and the navigation instructed us to drive forward and make a right turn on Holland Place, which would have involved us driving through the carriage house garage, but anyway. All three homes were built in the Spanish colonial revival style. This style became popular because of the Panama, California Exposition held in Balboa Park in San Diego, California. I once lived in an apartment across the street from this park, and if you ever go to San Diego, Balboa Park is a must-see. This exposition inspired architects and builders to design homes and commercial buildings in the Spanish colonial style of the expo. It was especially popular in California and Florida. Jake and Leah heavily promoted Asheville in Florida. Leah even drove her car around Florida cities with signs promoting Asheville plastered to her car. So it was natural that Kenilworth would have homes built reflecting this trend. You'll find quite a number of them around Kenilworth if you look carefully. Much has been said already about the Pollock and Green homes flanking Leah Chiles Park across the street from Chiles' house. The land was donated by the Chiles family specifically for a park. The street to the left facing the park, currently called Lakewood Parkway, was actually renamed for Jake Chiles in his honor after his death in 1925 by the town of Kenilworth. I found that vote in the town records, which still exist in the Asheville City Clerk's office. Presumably, due to the annexation, the street sign was never changed. The park itself was called Lakewood Park initially and featured this beautiful pavilion and a wading pool that many fondly remember. It was just in front of the stone wall that exists where the current new playground equipment stands. To the right of the park on the other street, also called Lakewood Parkway for some reason, is an apartment building built in 1926 called Lakewood Apartments, which promoted its views of Lake Kenilworth. Jake's fellow developers wanted a golf course, but Jake held out for a lake. They did dissuade him, however, from putting a replica of Excalibur in a stone at the lake's edge. Kenilworth street names have been said to be inspired by the 1821 romantic novel Kenilworth by Sir Walter Scott. The streets themselves were laid out by Jake Chiles' horse after the engineers were having trouble deciding how to navigate the steep hills. Jake simply dropped the reins and let his horse pick the path and told the engineers to follow the horse and put the streets there. We're going to skip down the street from about 26 Chiles to 27 Chiles. That's a bigger gap than you'd think. This 1927 colonial revival was an Airbnb and is now the home of a second-generation Chiles Avenue resident. There have been a number of them. It was once the home of Dr. P.F. Wiest, who gave a presentation on the effects of alcohol on the body, as well as to the Lahota family. I don't know if I have the pronunciation of that correct, so my apologies to those for whom pronouncing names is very important. Mrs. Lahota was very active in the local garden scene and president of local garden clubs, a tradition we're trying to maintain at our home today. We first met 31 Chiles in our segments on arts and entertainment on Chiles Avenue. A local music teacher lived here. A private kindergarten was run from this home as well in 1930. But I also happened to catch the fact that it was once the home in 1926 to 27 of our friend W.C. Shuey, president of Western Oil Company, who commissioned his neighbor, Ronald Green, to design 4 gas stations for him, including the one we know today as Spiver Green Jewelers. We covered this in the segment on the architecture of Ronald Green. It was a natural that neighbors could become business partners, but it also meant some could become political rivals. Just around the bend of the road in Chiles Avenue, as you head towards Lakewood, 3 homes were built in the 1920s. We met 36 as the possible home of Forrest Wood, who was assaulted by a police officer. We know 39 from its role in arts and entertainment as the home of Ziegfeld comic, Broadway and movie actress Lulu McConnell, home of author Millard Ward, and as the home where Bela Bartok is said to have composed the piano score of his famous Concerto for Orchestra. Next door at 41 was the home built by M.T. Holman in 1925. He, his neighbor Jack Faulkner, who we believe may have built number 39, and their neighbor A.H. Adams across the street at 36 all ran for town commissioner for the town of Kenilworth on different political tickets in the 1928 elections. Yes, plural elections. But first, a digression. If you followed, we surmised that while Forrest Wood's address was given in one news account as 40 Chiles, no such address existed. 36 was the highest numbered even number address in directories. But that same year, the city directory lists A.H. Adams as living at 36 as well. Welcome to the sometimes hair-pulling experience of historical research. In attempting to pin down who lived where on Chiles Avenue for the 1928 elections, I discovered that the Miller phone directory for Asheville showed that some of the homes on what we know as that end of Chiles Avenue was called Lakewood Drive, instead of, or in addition to. The 1926 directory listed the residents of Chiles Avenue by name, but with no house number. 1927 was their first attempt. So, Lou Pollock at 24 Chiles is listed as number 3 Lakewood Drive, and also 24 Chiles is listed as the home of Mrs. Robeson. Okay, so perhaps from there they decided to call the rest of the street going that direction Lakewood. Except 29 Chiles is farther along the street than Ronald Green, and it wasn't built until 1955. When it was built to the left of 27 Chiles, so that the house addresses today run number 29, number 27, number 31 Chiles. And 15 Lakewood is actually 9 Lakewood, and that was all the way over at Lakewood and Dudley, where it was the filming location of An Asheville Love Story, the film from Entertainment on Chiles Avenue, and today is listed as 9 Dudley. Okay, back to where I started. This is where I found that 40 Chiles is the home of Wood in his 1926 attack and the 1927 directory. And 17 Lakewood is the home of Adams in the 1927 directory and 36 Chiles in the 1928 directory. So after hours of research, I concluded that 17 Lakewood and 40 Chiles were actually 36 Chiles, and that Wood must have moved out and Adams moved in sometime in 1927, I think. Where were we? Right. In 1927, a group of 9 Kenilworth citizens, including 5 from Chiles Avenue, sued the town council for not having held an election. The mayor at the time, James Kane, claims an election would have been a waste of taxpayer money as the city of Asheville was about to annex the town of Kenilworth. A judge disagrees with that logic, and an election is called for February 1928. It was incredibly divisive. 2 factions form. One, called the Taxpayers Ticket, calls into questions the actions of the current town commissioners and mayor, questioning their management. They claim the town is trying to help the Kenilworth Company saddle the town with Lake Kenilworth and all the maintenance and repair costs. They claim bonds have been illegitimately issued and in a way that benefits the bond sellers. They question the construction of parks. But most explosively, they are upset about the annexation of, quote, a Negro community called Bracketville by the one mention of it I could find in the Asheville Citizen. No other source can be found, and some local historians wonder if they mean Brackett Town. The Taxpayers Ticket accuses, correctly, that the current administration and the opposing ticket are registering and organizing, quote, Negro voters. This is so anathema to them that when a source claims that the Taxpayers Ticket has also been registering, quote, Negro voters, they issue a public statement saying it is the work of a renegade supporter who registered a servant against their wishes. An opposing ticket forms. It is called by different names, including the Progressives Ticket, Citizens Ticket, and the People's Ticket. It supports and defends the current administration of the town, and some of those who sued the city actually run on this ticket. The Taxpayers Ticket holds a public town hall meeting to lay out their charges. The effort is led by M.K. Zindel at 11 Chiles Avenue. He's joined on the ticket for town commissioner position by A.H. Adams, traveling salesman who lives at 36 Chiles. Zindel lays out the charges on the funny business of the parks and bonds. The meeting is dubbed by the media as the Indignation Meeting. The People's Ticket respond with their own public meeting, attended by hundreds of people. By this time in Kenilworth, there are now 300 potential voters. The People's Ticket, in their public rebuttal, note that Zindel was a town commissioner and mayor during the events he himself is questioning. None of the incumbents, including Town Commissioner Leah Chiles, are running again. In fact, Chiles resigns to help further organize and register black voters. The People's Ticket includes Jack Faulkner of 39 Chiles Avenue. Remember, he lives across the street from A.H. Adams on the Taxpayers Ticket. The election is a clash of challenges to voter rights, especially black voters. The taxpayers challenge the majority of black voters, and according to news accounts, challenges are made before election judges, the day before the election, and again on the day of the election as they're entering the polling place. The People's Ticket, with the support of the black voters, win overwhelmingly. Zindel ends up with the lowest number of votes cast. He continues to open and close a string of businesses, and the last we hear of him is when his wife dies in 1943, not long after he has taken the position of manager of the Terrace Hotel in Andrews at Cherokee Town. For some reason, on October 5th of 1928, almost 8 months to the day after the contentious February election, a notice appears in the newspapers that another election is called for November 6th to once again elect a new mayor and 3 town commissioners. The issue of annexation by Asheville is hotter than ever, but at the same time appears to be supported by the vast number of locals. On October 28th, the Citizens Ticket, comprised of many of the same people who supported the James Kane-led Town Commission and the winning February People's Ticket, select their slate of candidates with Leah Chiles as their candidate for mayor. A few days later, the Progressives named their ticket with J.W. Test of 18 Chiles as the candidate for mayor and M.T. Holman at 41 Chiles for town commissioner, as well as 2 others. Holman is living next door to Jack Faulkner, who has just been elected in the February election. Holman is running on a ticket in opposition to Faulkner's supported ticket. There are no accounts of any contentious issues. The current owners at 41 Chiles actually have one of M.T. Holman's hand-drawn campaign posters. But the results are a landslide for Leah Chiles' ticket. The news accounts don't even bother to list the vote results for 2 of the candidates on the opposing ticket. Chiles' marketing talents are put to good use, and many articles around the country appear noting her achievement as the first woman elected mayor of a town in North Carolina, a fact disputed by Asheville City staff in 2018. One article at the time asked if her title should be mayoress. Chiles receives accolades from the National League of Cities and from the White House office of Herbert Hoover, which asks what her policies are and suggests that she lose some weight. Now, to be fair, the tone also implies that the writer knows her, and it may have been his lame attempt at humor. Back at Chiles Avenue, what happened to our trio of political opponents? A.H. Adams would die in 1931 in his early 40s. M.T. Holman loses his home at 41 Chiles to foreclosure, and little is known after that except for his occasional appearances in lists of local Democratic Party delegates. Jack Faulkner develops what was probably tuberculosis and is in a local sanitarium by 1933 after having moved to Florida with his family in the fall of 1931. That's when Lulu McConnell and her own ill husband move in. Faulkner died in 1936, and oddly, his obituary doesn't mention his wife, who records indicate was still alive after this time. As mayor, Chiles would be tasked with handling the annexation of Kenilworth by Asheville. She fights it all the way to the state legislature, insisting that it not happen without a vote of the people of Kenilworth and the other areas subject to extension of the Asheville city boundaries. She surprisingly wins, and a vote is held April 30th, 1929, and annexation, or extension as it's called, is approved by a large majority. Chiles hands over the Kenilworth Town keys to Asheville in her dining room at her home at 8 Bowling Park, a Ronald Green designed home near the Kenilworth Inn. On June 30th, the town council's final act is to dissolve the town and turn it over to Asheville. She refers to it as signing the death warrant of the town. According to family records, Asheville then tells Chiles they will buy the Kenilworth Town fire engine for $500. She insists it is worth $2,000 and challenges Asheville to a water duel in Pack Square, her fire engine versus Asheville's. She wins the duel and presumably her price. She served as mayor from November 15, 1928 to June 30, 1929, a total of 227 days. Jake Chiles was the first mayor of the town of Kenilworth, and Leah Chiles was its last. Thanks for sticking with me through all of this. We have only one more episode left. Next week, we'll look at Chiles Avenue one last time from 1940 to the current day. And please continue to support the PSABC. We know during the 2020 coronavirus pandemic, many organizations are struggling, and we appreciate your support to help us get through this.